It's all yours, Beth. Over there.
Well, thank you, Judy. So I will, begin with a little introduction, background, blah blah blah. And I'm going to be presenting the work of 3 different contemporary artists, and I'll tell you some about them, and show you their work, and then I'll pause, and we can take questions on that particular artist before we go on to the next one, and so on. And then, of course, as Judy said, at any time you have a question, feel free to ask that. So I do want to start and tell you what this class is not. This class is not me presenting work that I think is the ultimate, the most amazing work that we should all aspire to. This is not work that I am putting any kind of judgment on whatsoever, and if you ask me, why does everybody love this? I can't answer that. It is unanswerable. So I just want to, get that out there. And you can say, well, Beth, how did you come up with these 3 people, huh? So I had a pretty intensive session where I went and looked at all of the major art museums, all of the photography museums, all of the galleries in the major markets. I looked at all the big, well-known magazines to see who they were talking about. And from that list, I came up with 3 different artists. One other thing that I want to talk about is I feel very strongly about the importance of continuing to stay in touch with contemporary photography. And I'll tell you why. Why? People actually ask me that. And I'm like amazed. To me, it seems obvious. Number 1, and I'm assuming we're all artists, we're all photographers here, right? You can nod.
Right.
Good. I guarantee it is not a good thing to only be caught up looking at your own work, working on your own project to the exclusion of all else. That creates a kind of creative inbreeding, which is not good. As they say, you can't keep going back to the well, you have to feed the beast. And that is going out and seeing work. The other thing is, more than twice, believe it or not, 2 different people in different parts of the world have come up with nearly the exact same idea. And I guarantee that if you go out there and look, you will find another artist who is doing work that is similar to yours. And you want to know about that.
But not as good.
Pardon?
But not as good.
Of course. Never as good. So you might kind of panic if you find somebody whose work is really similar. There's a lot of fear that somebody will think that you're imitating them when you're coming from a completely different place. But actually, finding these people and looking at their work can be a tool. I think it's a great jumping off spot to dig deeper and look at what the differences are. And it's really important to examine that, because in that process, you're able to reveal for yourself your particular truth. And I think it gets you that much closer to developing your own voice. So it's a good thing. Number 3, I don't mean imitate when I say good artist copy, great artist steal. I am talking about going and seeing other work for the inspiration. There are a lot of times where I am just unmotivated and I just don't feel like going out and shooting, and you know, what's it all about? This all sucks, da 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 da. And it's in those moments that I turn to finding new work that gets me really excited and propels me out of my chair, out into the world with the camera, and gets me back to working. Number 4. I'm going to assume that you are not making work to slide under your bed or hide in a closet. I am hoping that you are exhibiting your work and to share with an audience, right? And to do that, you're going to be working with arts professionals, and they expect you to be familiar with what is going on in your field, contemporary photography. So you need to have a really good idea of who's out there, who's doing work similar to you, who's influencing you, and kind of how you fit in to the history of photography. So it's very important in that practical sense. And then of course, number 5, cocktail parties. That is, if we ever get to have any more, where it gives you something to talk about, right? That's what education is about, after all. So we got that out of the way, and I want to talk about the 3 different artists that I came up with. And I picked out one artist who has been working steadily and exhibiting for 2 decades. And I'm kind of considering contemporary photography to be, you know, 21st century for the purposes of this. Now, I will be teaching a more intensive class in May called A Survey of Contemporary Art, where I look at a broad range of people who have been working in this same, you know, last 20 years, 21st century, but do a lot of tracing back to see where they come from. One of the most interesting things that you'll find is that most artists who are working today, you can trace their influences back to 2 different exhibitions. Very famous exhibitions. One was in '67 at MoMA, and it was called The New Documents. And that exhibition featured Diane Arbus and Lee Friedlander and Gary Winogrand. And the other kind of revolutionary exhibition was New Topographics, which was in 1975 at the George Eastman Museum. And that totally changed what American landscape photography was about. And one of our artists very much falls in line with this history. Think Alex Soth, right? So I'm looking at this one artist, and the really interesting thing, even though she's been working for 2 decades, and she's being shown in major museums now, she's represented by galleries who are taking her to art fairs, which means that people want to buy her work. She's being featured in magazines. People are still talking about her work, but hardly anybody that I know in the Southeast ever mentions her. She's quite an influence on the West Coast. So I selected her as somebody that I thought would be really helpful for us to look at her work. And then she has some things, a lot, her subject is very similar to the next artist, the other artist we're going to be looking at, who had his breakout project about 7 years ago, and has continued to do work and be shown since then. And then the last artist that we're going to look at is an international artist whose big breakout project was just last year, and no, actually at the end of 2018. And it was also published as a book that won a lot of prizes, and he was in like 21 exhibitions in 2019, which was amazing. And before we launch, one last thing to go over is the terms that I use. Some of these people use the same words and have different meaning. I want to talk about these, and I feel these 5 aspects encompasses how we discuss art. Number 1, the most obvious, materials and process, right? What kind of lens do you use? Is that digital or is that film? You know, is that a cyanotype? So on, like that, right? Number 2 is intention. And this is what is the goal of an artist? What's their motivation? What do they aspire to accomplish with this particular project? And then the next 2, I find people are really confused about and kind of hard to parse out. And that's subject or topic versus the content, what it's a photograph of. And your subject is what the project is about. Is it about immigration? Is it about gender? You know, so it's what it's about. It might be about immigration, but what you are photographing, the content might be like the debris that people drop as they cross the desert. So that's the difference. And then strategy is kind of like coming up with rules for yourself to use in this a particular project. Like in that example of immigration, you may decide to never show the horizon line, right? To give that kind of claustrophobic feel. Or you may only shoot at high noon, which is that ugly, garish light. So it's these strategies that you start building and creating to do your project. Okay, so first one, Brian Scootmont. His big breakout project, this exhibition was 2011, and this book was published in 2013, Graze the Mountain Sends. This is his first big project. Now, he's talked about as being a landscape photographer, but in his writings, what he talks about is, in his work, that landscape, and really you ought to replace that word with place, because it is focusing not just on the land itself, but on the people who inhabit that. It's the culture, it's the sociology, it's the details, all encompasses and faithfully conveying a place. This project, it's all mining towns in the West, and he's photographing these declining little towns and the inhabitants.
Hi, excuse me.
Yeah.
When you see pictures like this where it looks like they're posed, are they posed or are they just catching them in the moment?
That's interesting. A lot of people make a point of talking about that because that's part of talking about your strategy, whether a portrait is candid or not. From the looks of these, there's engagement, their eyes. I see a lot of engagement with the photographer. And I would say that they were definitely posed.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Maybe not posed in the sense of stand here and let me take your picture, but posed in the sense of may I photograph you as you stand there.
Yeah, yeah.
A little difference of approach.
Right, right. And he's working with a 4x5, by the way, medium, large format.
Oh.
And you know,
So
a
he can't
strategy of people using that is kind of like, you know, somebody gets their like I'm being photographed face, and you spend a half hour fidgeting with your camera, and they give that up, and you know, and then they're just being themselves, and that's when you get the picture. I've heard a lot of photographers talk about that. And I'll talk about the title, Grays, the Mountain Sins. He, this is the whole book is inspired by this poet, the poetry of Richard Hugo. And that's like the only text in the book was some poetry of Hugo's in the back. I think that's our last one. Yeah, okay. So here's the next series that he worked on. It's called Good Goddamn. And in this project, I forgot the name of this guy. And he's got 2 days of freedom before he has to go to prison. So Brian followed him throughout those 48 hours and photographed him and what he decided to do in those last days of freedom. Okay, this is an ongoing project of his called Vessels, where he is photographing the transients of the West, the hitchhikers, the drifters, and I love that portrait, by the way. This kills me. I love it. Trying to convey the kind of hopelessness. So, you know, that's a kind of, you know, selection of Brian's work. We're going to pause here and see if you guys have any questions.
Can you spell his last name?
Yeah, it's S-C-H-U-T-M-A-A-T. Scootmot. And his first name, Brian, is spelled with a Y.
Thanks.
Yep.
So do you know how he selected that guy that was going to prison? Like, do you would put an interview out, or not an interview, a call out, or he just knew this person?
Yeah, I think it's somebody he came across in his photographing. That would be, you know, something interesting for you to look up and explore, because I'm sure he talks about it, you know, somewhere out there. But just like the next photographer we're going to work with, he's somebody who develops relationships with a lot of the people that he photographs. And isn't it interesting? He goes back and forth between color and black and white. And he's picked up a lot of commercial work, photographing like annual reports. And it's beautiful work. I saw it. He's got a section of his website where he talks about, you know, this commercial work that he does, and it's gorgeous, some fashion, and it's most of it's in black and white. It's really good to see people requesting that.
And it's all film?
Yes,
Wow.
I think. You know, that just kind of goes past me. I just don't even think about it. I only think about process when it's something that's obviously different, you know. I just but I still, most people I talk to, you know, will say that you can't get that quality out of digital. And so for 4x5, you know, for large format, they're still doing film.
You know, Beth, when you look at this, you would not think of this photographer as somebody who'd be doing advertising work.
I know.
In
I
fashion,
know.
in fashion, like it's such a departure from this type of thing. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. That's really cool. And the next, is there any other questions? I'll move on to the next photographer who oddly does a lot of editorial work for like New York Magazine.
Let's say
Anybody?
this guy is terrific.
Yep.
I think so. I really love his work. It's gorgeous, very poetic. And I urge you to Google him and read, you know, some of the things he says about his projects and his motivation. So this is Katie Grannon. This is the artist. I can't ask for a show of hands because I'm not seeing everybody. But if you've ever heard of her, say yay.
Yeah.
Yay.
Okay. All right. Good. But she, like Brian, okay, let me back up.
Is that a picture of her?
No.
That's one of her pictures. Okay.
Yeah, it's one of her pictures. So I can start. This is, she is a graduate of the Yale MFA photography program, which is really intensive about theory, concept, ideas. And what's interesting to me is she comes out of the program, and of course she's steeped in that. And so her works are really focusing a lot on her strategy, on these concepts and ideas about making portraits of people. I'll tell you what that is. Throughout the 2 decades, she continues photographing the same kind of people, doing portraits and doing the same kind of people, but her understanding of herself and her motivation and what the photographs are really about transitions over time. And I think that's really interesting. So, all right, this takes a little bit of explaining. And there's going to be some breaths. I hope that's okay. So what she would do is she would place an ad in the local newspaper, right? You know, artists seeking model. And then she would arrange to photograph them at their place. She would tell them, you know, that she would photograph them nude or clothed or somewhere in between. It was up to them. And that the poses were collaborative. And what she was looking for, but other than that, she wasn't telling them what to do or how to pose. So she would leave it up to them. And they're in this uncomfortable position of trying to figure out what the artist wants. So the subject is people who you see these glamorous fashion magazines, and you have this idea of what an artist wants to do, and you're projecting what you think the artist wants you to do. And it's in their very humble homes, and they're in their way, they're trying to replicate this kind of glamour. And it's that awkwardness that makes the portraits interesting. So she then transitioned. She was continuing to do the same strategy of putting ads in the papers, but then she changed from photographing people at their home to photographing them out in public spaces, like these state parks, where it was known people would go to party or people would go to hook up. So there is this kind of underlying sexuality and, you know, doing this kind of intimate portrait in a public space, adding more to that kind of awkwardness. Yeah? Was that a question?
I don't think so. I think somebody's sound was just.
Okay, yeah,
Going on.
cool. But there's this, to me, there's this also kind of this pastoral, a lot of them are, you know, I think of the painting like Déjeuner sous l'herbe, you know, these 1800s, turn of the century of this leisure class, you know, having picnics in the great outdoors and so on, especially her use of the light, which changes. At this time, like 2008, she moves from the East Coast to the West Coast. And she's still doing portraits, but it's like Brian, it's focusing more. She's realizing, well, what she finds interesting is these people who are on the fringes of society. And even though they are on the fringes, it's their efforts to, you know, to dress up, to partake in this kind of cultural things that go on. And she's, they kind of look candid. She is definitely posing them. And to create works that look posed, like they're kind of street people that you might be passing. And she's choosing to shoot them in this harsh noonday sun, which, you know, in photography classes, they're always telling you, no, don't ever, you know, shoot in that contrasty light because it shows every flaw, every wrinkle. But that's exactly what she's going for, is, you know, the life that's kind of imprinted on these people. And they're a life of struggle.
Wow.
And so I think that's the last, I don't know, that's the last one. Like Brian, but even more so, she has sought out long-term relationships with some of these people. And she's still doing some portraits that are in this vein. But she started following certain people, and it's segueing to a more documentary style, and she's taken up film. And I think it was 2019, she released a feature-length documentary where it's called The Nine, where she followed 9 people who are transients, who you know, are homeless and going from city to city. But I decided not to show a feature-length film. Any questions about Katie?
Anybody have any questions?
No.
No? Okay.
So I find it interesting. This is another one. It's like, this is not the obvious choice for portraits of elegant people, you know, for the famous, for the wealthy, for the powerful. But she does bring an interesting look to people, and she gets commissions, you know, for New York Magazine. I got a list somewhere.
I thought the first few were interesting as I was looking at them, the one she shot inside their homes.
Yeah.
But her angle and the way she placed them, they looked bigger than life in the space. She made the space look small compared to how the people were placed.
Right. And she talks about how claustrophobic these places are, you know, and you know, in a way, I feel those photographs are really about, and those I find are the ones that I find most interesting. That it's the place that they live that is most interesting, you know, and to me, you know, it's like one girl has a bird, you know, and I can see her saying, I've got a bird, you want me to go get, you know, and Katie going, yeah, sure, get the bird, you know, and you know, it's, I also, she's, you know, in the broad statement, she says that she's meeting at people's places. Let's page back to some of those. But sometimes too, they were meeting in like vacant second homes. Like I imagine this is somebody's mountain house. And they've broken in and had a photo session, or homes that are for sale. And one of the things that I do is on this one, I remember her talking about particularly, and it's the place was formerly a brothel, and you kind of got the feeling that it sort of still was. And then at this one, you know, I could see somebody going, well, gee, I'm not comfortable being naked. I know, I'll keep my pantyhose on. You know, it's like, what?
What year was this?
And then what's that little sculpture in the background?
It's like a devil woman who's kissing a man. I mean, and I remember going into like a one of those little bodegas in New Orleans and seeing statues like exactly like that for sale. Like they're mass produced. And I'm like, do they have some kind of special meaning, like, you know, voodoo or something? I don't know, but I love it.
I love the objects and the environment that kind of contextualize the subject. Like the photograph 2 back of the woman sitting on that bed in the basically empty room, but there's that one tiny picture of a child up above the bed.
Way up high.
It changes the whole vibe of the picture. If you took that picture out, it would be a very different portrait of that girl, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And including, and you can see by the way that she's composed the shot clearly to include that. And, you know, it's like, you get, it's like, oh, she's probably a single mother, you know, she's probably, you know, struggling along as much as she can. And this is like the only art she has to put on the walls. Clearly she doesn't have a lot of furniture. You know, this is somebody who's really struggling to keep their head above water. And it, you know, some of it's pretty heartbreaking. And two, you know, it's the poses, it's like, you know, these imitating these, you know, sexy fashion poses that they've seen before that just doesn't quite come off the same way. It's interesting.
Yeah, I was familiar with I think, was it called Mystic Lake? I had seen some of those photographs before, but I think I'm glad you brought her forward because I wasn't familiar with the artist and I didn't know the context that those pictures were taken in. And
right.
Yeah, really, really interesting work.
It really is. Her first book is called Model American, and it includes all of this early work and then the Mystic Lake work where she photographed people outside. And I think it's a fantastic book.
Did she only shoot female models, or did she have more men?
Yes.
men,
Yes.
just the women.
She doesn't say directly, but you know, all the interviews that I've read from her, I mean, she really relates to the women, and she's caught up in their struggles, their lives. And then there's the practical side. As a woman photographer, I would not meet a strange man at their home alone
Right.
to do portraits. So there's a practical aspect that I'm projecting. It's just myself. But she clearly, what she's interested in is these women, and not necessarily just young women, as her later work really goes out. And she does some men, like, especially this. There's a lot of men.
They're mostly on the street, so she's totally out in public there.
Yeah, exactly. It's safe. And same thing with Mystic Lake. There was a lot more men photographed in there. But like in her film, in the still photographs where she follows people and basically lives their life with them, it's women.
Interesting. Thanks.
Alrighty, right. So our last person,
Oh yeah.
Yorgos Yatromonolakis.
Nice job.
Thank you. I've been practicing. He is he's Greek, from the island of Crete. And that becomes central to his work. He starts out, this is when he's 15 years old, and it's in Greece during, you know, it's after the Great Recession, where a lot of European countries, countries in the European Union were having to do all these different budget cuts. And there's a word that I've been trying to remember all day. Somebody help me.
Austerity?
Austerity measures. Yes, thank you. The austerity measures. And they had like 25% unemployment amongst the young people. So he got involved with all these protests and riots that were going around across the country, and he couldn't use his camera. He used his cell phone, and you know, very low light. The next project he worked on, called Not This, and is when he did his required military service. Greece, just like Sweden and Israel, and I'm sure some other countries, young men have to do 9 months of military service. So he photographed that, and the end of that, he kind of had this like breakdown. So he went back home to the Isle of Crete and really threw himself into photographing nature. And he talks about it as just kind of being this blossoming where he became his true self. And so he titled his first project and book, this very long, The Splitting of the Chrysalis and the Slow Unfolding of the Wings. So this is all photographed on the Isle of Crete, and he starts really exploring with his process and materials. A lot of these are shot at night, though he talks a lot about preferring to photograph at dusk, which he feels is kind of this magical time of day for the light. It's, you know, between, you know, daylight and darkness. He played with techniques like using flash at night. It's very illustrative. I don't know what kind of post-processing he does, but clearly some, at times, pictures look more ink-like than photographic, but it's solidly in, you know, in the land of photography with these different effects that we recognize. And he talks a lot about the joy of photographing with flash at night. It has this kind of magic quality because you don't know what you're going to get. You know, you pop the flash, and then it's all exciting to look and see, what happened. What did it look like? There we go. That's his work. And he started showing it at the 2018 and published a book of the project, and the first edition sold out immediately. For everybody here, I have their CV and everything. Like I said, he had 21 exhibitions in 2019. France, China, the Ukraine, Spain, Georgia, and I don't mean us, Georgia, Ukraine, the UK. I mean, he had a show that year at Aperture, and there we go. Any questions about Yorgos?
Oh, let me unmute people.
All right.
All right, everybody's been unmuted. Who wants to be unmuted? Ooh, I love the color happening in here.
Yeah. I'm wondering what all he's doing. I mean, the iridescence, of that bird's wing is just phenomenal.
And that's the only color that's there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know about on your monitor, there's a little hint of yellow and green over in the grass on the right-hand side.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's largely monochrome. The one thing that disturbs me is I can't see the bird's head.
I noticed that.
I think this wing is just blocking it rather than it being headless.
I like the variety of the images you had, the variety of the photographers. They were all very different in how, in the types of things they photograph and how they handle them.
Thank you. I had a real hard time coming up with my 3 people. I found it harder, like the 2-day class that I'm teaching. It's great because I can have this one and that one, and it's divided. Let's look at portraiture and how it's evolved and changed. Look at landscape and all this. It's great, and it's like, okay, narrow it down to 3 people. Who are you gonna choose? So.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to the more involved class, which happens on May 3rd and 10th. So that is a 2-session class that is 3 hours each.
Yes.
Yeah. So
and I taught this class last year.
It was quite good.
Thank you. And this year will be better, of course. And but I decided 3 days was a big commitment. And they were like 3 classes, 2 hours each. So I was like, well, let's do 2 classes that are 3 hours each. And but each time we went over the amount of time. Anyways, there's so much to talk about. I mean, and I'll repeat, I just find it so amazing that so many of these artists, you know, it's like they were influenced by so-and-so, is influenced by so-and-so, who is influenced by so-and-so, is influenced by Gary Winogrand. You know, you know, it just keeps coming back, a lot of it. But then in the class, I also explore, it's a little more international. You know, like right now, the African photographers are having a huge influence. There's all kinds of people who are just grabbing up a different way of, you know, portraiture and doing that. It's just fascinating.
Beth, question.
Yeah.
This is Warren. Will you be handing out a syllabus or a list of the people who you'll be talking about in that class? I was just wondering if it might be interesting before the class to actually look through some of all of the work before you actually talk about it.
Oh, but that's like opening your your gifts before Christmas Day. I've done that as a child. It was not good. I will have a handout that has like a bio, usually their official bio from their website, and I will send those out, and I have no problem sending them out. Well, let me think about it, because it really is, you know, what?
So you did, Beth, the other class, you gave us the list of all the people afterwards, all of your links.
Yeah.
And that was very helpful.
Yeah. I'm definitely, and that was like, I hadn't even thought about that, and the class demanded it, and so I complied. But yeah, I'm going to send that out right before the class so that you can follow along yourself. You know, I like to print out stuff. I hate to.
Right.
And especially you'll need that if we're going to be doing it Zoom. Who knows if it'll be in person or on Zoom.
I'm going to guess it's probably going to be on Zoom.
Yeah.
All right, look at the back.